If you're familiar with some of these, CVE, Common Vulnerabilities Exposures, is the standard open naming scheme. The MITRE folks are right out the door, I think, down the hall here. Oval, all of these we have, and our friends at MITRE and others have been involved with. Either we created or we sponsored or we worked with others to help create these things. Again, think of them as a way, so CVE, for example, the naming of vulnerabilities. When we've seen a new flaw, the goal as a community is to have a unique way to identify it and a way to communicate that uniquely and use it to link information together. So if you're familiar, and you really ought to be familiar with the National Vulnerability Database out of NIST, it's based upon CVE as actually the database key that links everything together. Right, so once you have a universal identifier, then you have a way to link cert advisories and bug track postings and all this information into one place. Okay. Oval and these other things I won't go through, but you can find all this on the NIST website. But these are different kinds of standards, some of which are brand new, we've just put on the table, to help us organize the stuff or the output of the vulnerability business. I will mention XCCDF because it's a little more extensive. Extensible Common Checklist Description Format, I think. Sorry, that came from NSA. It's the next generation of security guidance. Okay, all the security guidance, benchmarks and so forth that I talked to you guys about. The old days, it was narrative. We recommend that you set this registry key to that value, okay, which evolved into different kinds of documents, which evolved into plugins for specialty tools. Where should it evolve to? The modern model, right? An open standard XML. And so that's what XCCDF is. It's the next generation, the way that what we think will become the native language of security guidance. And once you move to an XML representation, you not only can send the guidance, but you can also send the security tests, for example. You can drag that along. You can drag along the documentation. You can do all kinds of really powerful things. So that could become the native expression of security guidance. All the advice givers have agreed to move in that direction. And it's a very powerful idea, I think, whose time has come. If you're interested in this, again, there'll be a link at the end. There's a major workshop at NIST, September 19th and 20th, on security content automation. You can just Google on that, and you'll find links to that. And the ... at the bottom is because I think there's more standards to be developed yet. It's a very exciting time in this. And again, the level of cooperation has been very high. And if you don't know about these things, I'd really encourage you to look into them because this has the attention of folks like the Office of Management Budget and the buyers and so forth. And many vendors, including many of you out here, already support some or all of these standards. But I wanted to give you a hint. There's kind of a bigger picture here. And then there's, of course, the fixtures, if you'll pardon me, straining the metaphor just one more time. So what do you get as these things emerge? Right? Well, you get a much more open environment for the tools of vulnerability management. And you get to link things together that weren't linked together before. So you'd like to be in a world where you take outputs from multiple tools, can correlate them, can integrate them, and use them to drive as inputs to other tools. For example, the simple examples from the vulnerability scanner to the patch manager. You'd like that to be done in an open way because, like in a complex environment like we deal a lot with the Army, they've got many different kinds of vulnerability scanners running, not one. And because they run a very complex worldwide network. And so they need multiple tools to manage that. And they need to be able to integrate the information across multiple tools in a manner to drive remediation and to deal with reporting and lots of other big issues. So there can't be a single model of how all this works. There has to be a way for these tools to interact. And then the notion of integrating reporting. So in a perfect world, and we're not there, but we're getting there, you'd take information you learned from a red team and integrate it with what you learned from the blue team, each of whom takes a dramatically different view of the network. And we'd integrate that with what sensors see for us as it's collecting data passing through, for example, gateways. And we'd pull all this information together. Well, of course we do it today. Right? We either buy all our tools from one vendor or we ask poor human beings to integrate all this information. Right? So neither is an acceptable solution at the national level. And so we have to think about how can we have a world where this plumbing connects all these things together. So it's a much more powerful way to think about these problems. Okay, so plumbing. I mentioned earlier this Security Content Automation Program, the SCAP program. There's a lot going on there, but it's focused on things like automating compliance, the IT controls part of compliance, managing vulnerabilities, performing measurement, and so forth. So it's a evolving thing. It's very exciting, though, because the interest from the vendors and buyers has grown dramatically in the last year. The standards are maturing at different rates. Some are very mature, some are immature, frankly. So there's a lot of work to be done here yet. But it's very exciting in terms of the potential to build a framework for moving vulnerability information around. This is kind of the way that I've been thinking of this problem for some time. So you're welcome. I'll give you the link at the end for this website. Homed at NIST. Since we have a couple of minutes, I think. Let me tell you a kind of a parallel story. It's the way I've thought about the business for several years. It takes advantage of some of those standards. It's a little different thought about this. Across the bottom, I promise you no professional artists were used in the production of my group. None of your tax dollars were used in the professional, in the generation of these diagrams here for you. This is all me just dreaming this stuff up. But these are all jobs that my folks do. And we do lots more. But these are representative. Red teaming, you know what that is. Blue teaming. Operations, security, OPSEC. It's the what are we giving away for free, by the manner in which we conduct our operations, the patterns of our activity that adversaries can watch and see what we're doing. We have a group that it's actually a national level activity that helps train people in that and helps them set up their own operations security programs. ComSec monitoring is by permission from NSA. We work closely with the DoD in particular on monitoring open communications for stuff that we're giving away to bad guys for free through websites and through open email and voice and so forth. And technical security is about the physical environment that you work in. Right, so bugs and implants and that kind of world. We have teams that do sweeps and field testing and that sort of thing. Well, the reason I draw them down here, each of these jobs developed independently, right, for a different reason, history, under a different funding stream, with different human beings, all to solve a particular problem. And I draw them as little things like this, right? The old politically incorrect way to say, these jobs were all in stovepipes. Of course, we're politically correct here, so we call these now cylinders of excellence. So cylinders of excellence means that these jobs developed, but there was really no communication between them. Right? In fact, these were highly polished cylinders of excellence, very brightly shining, because there was no reason to share. They were independent jobs being done. When this is where you are, right? When this is the businesses that you run, then your concern is over things like efficiency. Do we have the biggest, baddest red team in the DoD? And are we delivering? Can we do 20% more jobs next year than we did last year? And are all my people trained, et cetera, et cetera? And we became very focused on that, because each of these jobs came up differently. But that wasn't good enough. So a few years ago, and again, we started to see this as a much broader problem. And so you're not going to solve this one network at a time through red team testing or product testing or field testing. So I asked the workforce to rethink this and refocus on community behavior, i.e. go find the other practitioners like us. So it's not, are we the biggest, baddest red team in the DoD? It's, who are the other red teams in the DoD? Why don't we work together? Right? Because they're going places that we can't. None of us is going to test the entire DoD. What can we do as a community? Right? And in many cases, I'll have to admit at NSA, we usually do have the biggest of any of these teams and the best resourced. So when you're the biggest, you have a responsibility to stand up and be the leader. Right? And so sometimes our leadership is codified in directives and national things, but a lot of times it's informal. And we're happy to follow, too, by the way. But what do leaders do? What do communities do? Well, they gather together. They bring the people together in events like this, and they share lessons learned, and they swap tools, and they come up with standards of reporting, and they standardize their data, and they figure out how do we train people up to a certain level, and how do we calibrate across a bigger community. So that's what we started to do. So that took the form of community events, things like we host the major gathering of the red and blue teams across the DoD. If you've seen the press on something on the cyber defense exercise, we are the hosts for the hacking contest among the military service academies. We codify the training of the red teams across the DoD and set up tool sharing and now setting up standards for data output and so forth so information can be correlated. That's what you need to do when your focus is about a community. It's about bringing people together, right? And realizing that no one of us is going to solve this problem. It's much bigger than us. And by the way, what's the role of commercial friends in this? Can we spin off? And we have now several examples where we've taken kind of our methodology and spun it off in a way that you can go get trained and certified in. If it means anything to you, if you want to do certain jobs the NSA way, there are now ways to do that. Okay, and that has meaning in certain circles and other meanings in other places it doesn't. But it gives you a way to extend your leverage and your influence across a much broader community. So we started to think about this as community behaviors. But it was still primarily within these cylinders of excellence, right? We still really focused on how do we get better within our community. But again, that's not going to solve the problems. About 4 years ago, or maybe a little longer, we started to think about, what's become everybody's favorite buzzword is integration. And my concern as a federal manager is I have all these unique sources of information. These are all dramatically different, unique, and really powerful and interesting sources. But they're a lot more interesting if I can bring them together. Right? What I see from red teaming is very dramatically different than others. It plays mock adversary, quietly comes in, but doesn't get to see what's really happening behind the firewall at any scale because it's too noisy. But the blue team gets to do that. And the blue team gets to figure out, how is this IT being used to support critical operations for the Defense Department, for example? And the ComSec monitoring folks, they get to see, oh, we just gave away information that would be critical information to support a red team scenario that a bad guy could exploit, and so forth. So there are lots of these examples that start to become clear. So how did we correlate this? Well, poor human beings tried to do it, right? And it's too hard. So as we started to bring that information together, what you get is, since each of these jobs develop separately, they speak a different language. So when red teamers talked about password policy, they used different terms than when the blue team spoke about it, than when the ComSec monitoring folks spoke about it. So then you have to put your best human beings in a room with stacks and stacks of paper trying to sort through that and reconcile it. Doesn't make any sense. So if you're going to integrate information, you need to start thinking of the problem differently. So the buzzword I came up with back then was what I call security sampling. All right, so let's stop thinking of this as just jobs that we do that we want to get better at. Again, we're not going to test our way to security at anything the scale of the DoD. So we want to think of this as, again, I have a daughter who's an English major. I paid good money for her tuition, so I always use metaphors whenever I can. Every time we touch the network, it's a sampling of the security in the DoD's networks. That became kind of the bumper sticker for us. So what's the purpose of sampling then? Well, the purpose of sampling is so we can draw conclusions about the underlying population, right? What's really going on out there? What's the most common problem? And what is the root cause? And how does it relate to other problems? And where's the best place in the life cycle to go tackle that problem? And one of the laws of security, I think, I'm not sure anyone's written this down, is that the optimal solution to security problems is almost never where you found them. Right? So when red teams find a problem and point it out in the operational environment, right? And they're very good folks. They'll tell you exactly what they did. They'll even give you the patch number from Microsoft to explain to you how to go find the patch and point you to the server. But if that network doesn't have a pretty strong way to manage configuration changes generally, that's not the place to solve this problem with that patch, right? It's at the network management level. So I think that's one of life's lessons here. So you have to think of sampling as the way we get to things like root cause and where do we solve this problem. So that became kind of the way we thought of the sampling. So two things. You want to draw conclusions when you sample. Right? You want to help that one customer. Yes, absolutely you do. But the bottom line is the real powerful model is about security sampling. And then two, if you design your sampling framework cleverly enough, what happens? You don't have to do all the sampling. All your friends can work with you, right? And we can build kind of a scientific basis for integrating information across many different communities. Right? So that's the way we've come to think of this. And we use the buzz phrase integrated analysis and reporting, if you don't mind. That's the way we talk about it. But you got the idea. Okay, so as I mentioned, I'm getting to be one of the truly old dudes in the computer security business. And so I get to pontificate. People ask me, what do you think and what have you seen change? And I'm not really that old. But here's a few of my life lessons. And I think they're illustrated in some of the things that I just talked about over the last half hour or so. If we're going to deal with this problem at the national level, to gain assurance, to build confidence in what we're doing, these are sort of the intuitive things that have come out to me. One is about organizing the content generators, right? So stop thinking of us as individuals doing individual jobs. But how do we bring communities together? Because folks like you and folks like my folks, we are the original content generators in this business. We create unique things, unique information that can drive everything else. So you have to bring us together. A big part of that, though, is about standardizing the raw data. Right? This is a business that's been folklore and reading bug track and lots of really, we've outgrown that. It's too big now. The information is too vast, too dynamic, changes constantly, and matching problems